Hello. In this video, we will be showcasing the top 10 games on the PlayStation 4. These are a collection of thrilling and amazing games that you may have spent hours exploring and enjoying.
Oh, this fast healing stuff is gonna come in real handy.
Let's take a look at these fantastic games. If you enjoy my videos, please consider subscribing to be notified of new uploads and hit the bell button to ensure all notifications are working. Second Son's story is set in 2018, 7 years after the events of Infamous 2, in which that game's protagonist Cole sacrifices himself to cure humanity and save them from a plague. But with what Cole did, there isn't much conduits left. Conduits are essentially people born with powers, but they are oppressed and looked down upon by the wider society. As the conduit population is at an all-time low, the US government has formed an organization known as DUP to hunt down and capture the world's remaining conduits, calling them bioterrorists. They would be locked up and wouldn't be able to see the outside world who feared them due to the propaganda of the DUP and the US government as a whole. Our protagonist is a 24-year-old graffiti artist and delinquent known as Delson Rowe, and he's fantastically voice acted by the masterful Troy Baker. Delson at the very start of the game gets a power that is unique to him and something that we really haven't seen in the series thus far, with his power of power mimicry, which allows him to take the powers and abilities of anyone that he comes into contact with that has powers. The story sees him trying to save his tribe, which are basically his family, by going to the head of the DUP and trying to steal her powers. Slowly throughout the game, he rips the DUP from the inside as he infiltrates and absolutely obliterates their bases and command centers, all for his ultimate goal of trying to find the leader of the DUP, known as Augustine. There's a lot of fun characters, and some of the most noticeable ones are the really fun and interesting Eugene, Fetch, and the main character's brother, known as Reggie, which really added a lot to the game's narrative, and the character interactions between all of them was really interesting to see in my opinion, and I overall really was a fan of the game's story. It's probably one of my favorite aspects of the game, and I don't think it's one of those instances in which the story is only really there so that the gameplay of the game can excel, and instead I think there's been quite a lot of obvious effort that was put into the narrative of the game, and the developers over at Sucker Punch really did try with the game's narrative, and I've got to say that what they've done is an absolutely fantastic job with the game's story, and in some cases I would say the story of this game is good on its own, and that you should buy it just for this reason. So if you like a good and funny story with some really interesting and funny character interactions, the story of this game will provide exactly that, and the characters in this game are extremely engaging. Quick note before we move on to the gameplay section of this video, and I've just got to say the game's soundtrack is absolutely amazing, and it's such a good and compelling soundtrack. It just fits in every scenario, and I just can't explain it. Absolutely phenomenal, and I really can't get over how fantastically the talent at Sucker Punch Games has tuned everything in this game. Now let's talk about the fantastic gameplay of Infamous Second Son. The gameplay is so damn good. Just like in Infamous 1 and also the second game, karma plays a big role in the main story of the game. At specific plot points within the game, your karma and actions throughout the implications of how you play Delson will impact the broader world and completely change the path of where the narrative is going and who Delson ends up becoming by the end of the game. Either a light-hearted hero of Seattle or a demonic killer and murderer is condemned by all for his actions against humanity and for abusing his powers for pure evil actions. This contrast is really well done, and luckily it's all done by how you play the game and how evil or good you make Delson out to be, either helping civilians or murdering them in cold blood to get to your objective. Because Delson has so many different powers due to being able to absorb the powers of others, he replaces the electric powers that were concurrent in previous Infamous games with the protagonist Cole, who could only have those electric powers, and instead Delson has a few different powers, which I will not mention here because I want you to see when the powers come one by one, so it's more of a surprise, and so getting that power will be a lot more fun as well, which is why the gameplay that is in the background only consists of the first power that you can get in the game, which is the awesome and well-made smoke power. Every power that you can get in the game can drastically change the way that you approach most aspects of the game's gameplay. Over the course of the entire game, you'll keep gaining access to new and interesting powers by allying with other conduits and then taking their powers to achieve your ultimate goal of taking down the entirety of the DUP and their forces, as well as of course the head of the DUP, recipe is of course Augustine. Delson can only use one power at a time, but you can drain and find sources to use the other powers in your arsenal while free roaming the map, and switching between these different powers is no hard task and is instead very fluid and works well in the flow and conjunction of the gameplay itself. Players can shoot without having to aim as well, and this can instill an awesome flow into combat, making it more fluid and quick as well, as you just spray all the enemies in your vicinity with whatever power that you're currently using. Absorbing the powers when you find the source is done through the touchpad, as this game does utilize a lot of the features of the DualShock 4 controller, such as the touchpad, and the aiming, shooting, and handling in general is so damn good, and again, it's just so fluid. The game's gameplay is fantastic overall, from switching between all your different powers to flying, running, and teleporting across the game's expansive open world. There's a lot to unpack within the cool gameplay elements of this game, but I don't want to drag this video on. But if you were considering picking the game up after seeing the story section of this video, the gameplay should have just been that extra push that would make you finally play and buy this fantastic video game. PlayStation 4 exclusives, and the game is generally wonderful with this amazing and extremely engaging gameplay mechanics and open world environment to the game's awesome narrative and well-made characters that really make the game one of the best on the PlayStation 4. The Last of Us is one of the rare beloved games of the past decade that not only didn't demand a sequel, but actively seemed to resist the idea of one. Its story is poignant enough because of how self-contained it is. But with The Last of Us Part 2, developer Naughty Dog rises to the challenge with not only a complex and brutally emotional story that gives it a reason to exist, but also deep and satisfying evolutions to the original's third-person action stealth gameplay. Part 2 starts out seemingly simple, taking place about 4 years after the end of The Last of Us, and setting an older, angrier, but still immune Ellie on a quest for revenge that hones in on the cycles of violence that can plague humanity as much as any infection. As it grows into something further reaching and ambitious, it knowingly leans into and often subverts the tropes of the genre, such as guilt by association and the inevitable escalation of matching an eye for an eye. Games are often defined by giving us the power to choose what happens, but The Last of Us and Part 2 concern themselves more with a specific depiction of its characters. We're asked to take them as they are, and that leads to some of the most fully realized characters in gaming who I always empathized with, even if I didn't always agree with them. It delivers experiences that are incredibly memorable for how uncomfortable and challenging it is to be forced to act them out yourself. Ellie is the protagonist of Part 2, and the focus on her allows for so many funny, frustrating, vulnerable, endearing, and frightening moments. It all stays true to what the original game established while deepening my understanding of her. Baker is no less fantastic as Joel, even though Part 2 is more focused on Ellie. He sells the weariness of a man who has taken so many lives to save his own and the lives of those he cares about, and made questionable moral decisions out of love. There's also a great cast of supporting characters introduced, like Shannon Woodward's instantly charming Dina. I would be remiss if I didn't mention, though, in the most spoiler-free of terms, the incredible performance by Laura Bailey. Like so many of The Last of Us's characters, calling this new character purely good or evil would be reductive. Her motivations are just as legitimate and arguably noble as Joel's or Ellie's. Most of these actions revolve around the larger conflict between the warring groups in Seattle, where much of Part 2 takes place. The many characters you'll encounter here are one of the major ways in which Naughty Dog avoids the fatigue that set in for many with Uncharted 4's last act. Even though it's about 25 hours long, Part 2 never drags because there's always new voices to hear. The way stealth, action, and puzzle sequences play out remains very familiar. That said, Part 2 has taken major steps to add variety to avoid the repetition of the first. And yeah, some of this sorta seems obvious in hindsight. Like, it's silly to think that adding a jump button in 2020 could feel fresh, but Ellie's athleticism most definitely proves to be key to keeping Part 2's combat encounters interesting and surprising over time. Whether you're going in loud or quiet, the scope of these battlefields is great. They take place in areas like multi-tiered shopping malls or fragmented skyscrapers that offer what feels like naturally complex puzzle boxes. There's always plenty of room to sneak around and pick off enemies one by one, or, as usually happened to me, plan to be stealthy but get caught and scramble to narrowly escape danger. Ellie's moves let you improvise to stay one step ahead of some significantly smarter and better coordinated enemies. That is, if you can learn to understand the various factions. Seraphites communicate via whistles, the WLF carry deadlier modern weaponry, and the infected... Well, no, they haven't started talking to each other, but their mob mentality is more threatening than ever. New enemies like the Shambler throw noxious spore bombs that cut off potential escape routes or obscure other enemies. The returning stalkers become even scarier than before, with smart pack mentality as they hide away from Ellie's listen mode ability. Fights with this mixture of infected enemy types led to several encounters that rivaled the best survival horror experiences I've had. Speaking of horror, Part 2 has some of the most brutal combat animations I've seen in any game, and it's not played for laughs. I'm not squeamish, but I did sometimes find myself choosing to be stealthy just to save myself from watching this again. Playing non-lethally is often possible but rarely easy, especially when they loose the dogs who can track your scent even when you're well hidden from humans. You've got to move or you're dead meat, and sometimes that means running for your life. The artfully detailed and realized locations Ellie travels through are layered with backstory. It seems as though every room tells a tale of people frozen in time, and the density and detail of it astonished me. That's especially true of the Uncharted Lost Legacy style open world area, which rewards exploration with great character moments. It was also a huge relief that I never once had to find a floating pallet to use as a raft for someone who couldn't swim. Part 2's environmental puzzles never feel as mindless as that because they rely a lot more on contextual challenges that make smart use of Ellie's journey through skyscrapers, residential neighborhoods, sewers, and much more. And those clever designs are dressed with some of the most beautiful environments I've seen from the PlayStation 4 generation. Fantastic audio design plays a big role as well. It starts with a moving score by returning composer Gustavo Santaolalla and goes all the way down to the little details. Characteristic for the region, the oppressive thump of rain masks the terrifying noises of the infected that lurk outside. From the slight hum of a silenced pistol, to the harrowing doom of a shotgun. From the guttural screams of the clickers, to the muttered self-reflection of Ellie as she kills an enemy. Naughty Dog's post-pandemic world sounds alive. The Last of Us Part 2 is a masterpiece worthy of its predecessor. Taking strides forward in nearly every way, Ellie steps into the spotlight and carries the sequel in a manner that feels like the culmination of everything that's made Naughty Dog's blockbuster storytelling so memorable. It delivers a layered, emotionally shattering story on top of stealth and action gameplay that improves the first game's mechanics while integrating a bit more of Uncharted's greater mobility and action. But while Part 2 is a thrilling adventure, it still makes time for a stunning, nuanced exploration of the strength and fragility of the human spirit. The PlayStation 4 has one of its finest exclusives in one of the generation's best games. Miles Morales may just be finding his footing as a superhero, but his first solo game proves developer Insomniac has comfortably hit its stride with this series. Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales is a worthy starring debut for Miles, telling as engaging a story as the original game, while simultaneously improving upon pretty much every gripe I had with it. This may be a smaller package overall, but every facet of it feels more essential. And while it's available on PlayStation 4, it's best experienced as a gorgeous introduction to the promise of the PlayStation 5. All of the improved frame rates, lighting, and particle effects enhance the city just enough to make this former New Yorker achingly miss the city I once called home. Actor Najee Jeter returns to the title role and gives Miles a sincerity, heart, and excitement that stands tall next to the other depictions of him out there, including Into the Spider-Verse. Spider-Man Miles Morales follows in the smart storytelling footsteps of the original game by ensuring the events of life underneath the mask come head-to-head with the webhead's trials and tribulations. And while you're free to explore the full New York map from Spider-Man to take in its fantastic new Christmas-time look and near-instant loading times, much of the story is rooted in Harlem. We get to know Miles' apartment as well as the neighboring blocks around him. And with militaristic tech conglomerate Roxxon building a new Plaza HQ in Harlem, this welcoming home neighborhood becomes the center of an engaging struggle as it fights to maintain its identity in the face of corporate takeover. Miles Morales is a story worthy of its namesake. An exploration of the responsibility that comes with being a hero and the ways a hero's personal relationships can complicate those noble ambitions. More than anything, Miles just wants to do right by Peter, his family, his friends, and his new home. I won't spoil where any of the story takes Miles and his supporting cast, but it's a stirring and gripping Spidey tale that left me with goosebumps in its final moments. The anticipation of where the series goes next is a thrill in and of itself. Slipping back into the swinging and fighting mechanics of Miles Morales was as comfortable as it was exhilarating. Miles controls largely the same as Peter when it comes to the basics, but beyond those fundamentals and some shared unlockable skills, Insomniac has done a flat-out fantastic job of adding depth to Miles' movement and fighting skills to allow him to stand out as his own character. Watching Miles' animations as he swings through the city is a treat. With combat, Miles has a few new tricks that mix up the fun. On the one hand, there's his bioelectricity attacks. Mixing them in not only saved me in the midst of some packed battles, but they also added so much stylish flair and variety to how I approached brawls. Playing on PS5, I love how they bring about one of the more fun uses of the DualSense controller, like the way the crinkle of electricity is simulated with haptic feedback. And Venom-infused takedown animations are beautiful. Seriously, check this out. Add in Miles' cloaking ability, and suddenly any combat scenario can be transformed, even temporarily, into a stealth section. Also, I'm psyched that Insomniac actually addressed one of my larger gripes with the first game by making the various powers Miles can unlock with his new, awesome lineup of suits, or for his visor, more meaningful and interesting. I found myself switching them up quite often depending on the situation. Not every power-up has gotten the same love in my playthrough, but I kept wanting to test them out and try them in new scenarios. Another big improvement is that side missions and environmental objectives are actually consistently fun and rewarding. I loved Marvel's Spider-Man, but the way it was padded out with required crime battle quotas and Ubisoft-like radio towers made the hunt for upgrade tokens and to 100% it somewhat monotonous. However, the few bright spots among those missions seem to have served as the blueprint for Miles' side missions. There are still some crimes to stop, sure, but they're not as much of a focus. Instead, neighborly missions are impressively varied. Again, because Miles Morales is a smaller package overall, there's not a ton of these, but I'll happily take this more selective set of one-off missions rather than repeating the same task 30 times, especially alongside the plentiful collectibles. The way they offer some backstory for Miles is a nice touch, and they often include some light but entertaining environmental puzzles. Collections provide such a stunning take on this already beautiful cityscape that it seems like Insomniac is just showing off. Some like cutting through the misty clouds and snow was unexpectedly breathtaking at the height of a swing in the early moments of my first playthrough, and the wow moments only continued from there. Switching over to the 60 frames per second performance mode, however, offers beautifully smooth web swinging and combat without missing out on too much of the world. Lighting is a little flatter and less dynamic, and reflections aren't quite as there, but doubling the frame rate is instantly recognizable and appreciated. And as much as I prefer playing in cinematic modes overall, the smoothness the mode lends to exploration is really tough to give up. I recommend it after you've toured the city and appreciated it at its most beautiful. Insomniac's Ratchet & Clank series has seen a lot of releases. The game has really grown from what it originally started at, but the Ratchet & Clank PS4 version aims to distill it back down to what it once was and kind of connect it to the new movie that's releasing based on the game. If that sounds a little iffy to you, let me reassure you, this is a damn solid, great Ratchet & Clank game. It's not going to be for everyone just because it is definitely for the early 2000s platformer shooter crowd. You know, if you like this and you like Jak and Daxter, this is something you should jump into. First of all, can I just talk about how good the game looks? I think this Ratchet & Clank is the perfect example of graphics and how it doesn't always have to be photorealism to just look visually amazing and powerful and impressive. There's a lot of things going on: particle effects, lighting, view distance, character models that are incredibly detailed, but it is very much not based in the real world, and it just provides some really amazing looks and sequences, and I can't get enough of it. You know, these games have always aimed for like a Pixar-style movie come to life, and I think they finally nailed it. Because everything presentation-wise with this game is great. The graphics, the music, but also the voice acting, the writing, the cutscenes, and the jokes. It actually does use cutscenes from the movie to kind of intersplice them, but it doesn't feel awkwardly pieced together.
No vector shell damage. Sister board appears to be intact. I must get to Aliro City.
And it's just pretty consistently entertaining throughout. You're gonna like these characters, you're gonna have fun, and you're gonna chuckle to yourself. Yeah, it might not be laugh out loud funny all the time, but it's amusing. Maybe it's just because I've become a bitter old humorless man. What you need to know as a player is that this is very much a platformy style game, but with a lot of shooting. If you are a fan of the series, know that there's actually slightly less guns this time around, but there's a really good mix of the original guns with a few new ones. And if you know Ratchet & Clank, the series is known for just really creative, weird, over-the-top weapons. Here you have a disco ball grenade that makes enemies dance, a shotgun blast that turns enemies into pixels, a ridiculous over-the-top flamethrower, and a bunch of other things. This is all really great because there's an upgrade tree that you can spend bolts on to upgrade your weapon and turn it into something ridiculously different than what it started as. Not only that, but the guns actually level up from use like in some of the later games, so the more you use a gun, the better and quicker it levels up like in an RPG. So you and Ratchet, you run around, you shoot enemies, you break crates, you run and jump, you solve light environmental puzzles. But thankfully the game really shakes things up every once in a while. There's a lot of variety here so that you don't get bored. Not only are you hopping around from planet to planet, unlocking new gadgets and going back and unlocking old stuff, there's free-moving, kind of open-worldy ship battle sequences where you blow shit up, and there's also free-roamy jetpack exploration modes like Into the Nexus, if you remember. And that is definitely a welcome thing. The whole gameplay here in this Ratchet & Clank game is that it's basically like a greatest hits version of all the previous games. Even the story is different. It's not a direct reboot, it's actually kind of like a meta continuation and retelling of the original story. If that sounds a little confusing, you'll see when you play the game. So while it does tread the familiar ground of the first game, you do get more characters, more weapons, and just the bigger view of the world that you get from the other games in the series. And it just makes for a great combination, all done through some wonderful voice acting by some cartoon veterans, familiar voices that you've heard before by very talented people. And not only that, we get more Captain Quark, which is like one of the funniest, stupidest video game characters in a while.
All right, everyone, let's give these heroes some breathing room. I'm happy to field all questions on their behalf.
Dallas Wanamaker here. Does this mean you'll be asking these two heroes to join the Rangers?
Say what now?
For some of you guys, this might all really fall on nostalgia factor, whether it just feels like you're watching an older Pixar movie or cartoon, or if you just haven't played the Ratchet series in a while and you're falling back to your memories of the original, this just works in all ways. Believe it or not, this whole gameplay loop of running around and shooting stuff and upgrading your weapons and getting new gadgets, it kind of provides like an addictive loop. You really just kind of get hooked and just want to explore, one more planet. If you're into these types of games, you'll feel like a kid in a candy store. This game is so much fun with a bunch of really crazy action sequences. Most notably towards the beginning of the game, we're on a moving train and it is just incredible and it's so much fun. Like a lot of the other previous games though, playing as Clank in certain sequences leave a little bit to be desired. It's a bit boring, and for me it kind of drags on when it could have been way more exciting, but at least he's a really likable character. And that goes for all the characters. They're all memorable, and the adventure itself is pretty memorable, and it'll take you a while. It'll take you about 14 hours. Why it works, because not only is it like a platformer shooter that is just fun and cool and quirky with enough variety to shake things up every once in a while, but you also just have that sense of progression with collecting bolts and upgrading your weapons and stuff. God of War 3 is the final part of Kratos' revenge, but hopefully not the last God of War game. Developed by Sony's Santa Monica studio, God of War 3 upped the ante on everything that we knew from God of War 2. This remaster delivers it all in 1080p 60 frames per second with all the DLC packed in. God of War 3 crams in more enemies, more detailed executions, more detailed environments, and even more gruesome moves. It's interesting that Sony chose to remaster God of War 3 by itself and not God of War Ascension, but it has always been clear that this game had more favor among fans and critics. The story takes off with a high-impact introduction. Following the end of God of War 2, God of War 3 picks up directly after this, with an opening narration from Zeus discussing the actions of Kratos, who is commanding a small army of Titans rescued from the Great War. The Olympians immediately rush to battle, and Kratos engages the god of the sea, and after drawing him into Gaia's grasp, manages to knock a weakened Poseidon out of his godly form. God of War also knows how to immerse you in the Greek mythological world. The game is set in an alternate version of Greece, populated by Olympian gods. The game is set across several locations on the fictional Mount Olympus, including the Tome of Ares, the ancient city of Olympia, the Path of Eos, the Labyrinth, several areas of the Palace of the Gods, such as the Forum and Hera's Gardens, and the Underworld and Tartarus. God of War 3 is classic action fun. There's always a strong desire among gamers to control a muscular badass and crush all kinds of enemies. But if you want to pinpoint why it's so fun, it's because the game is seamless. There's enough variety and very few interruptions, and therefore you never get distracted from the core gameplay. Basic combat flows well, making it easy for anyone to chain combos and survive against hordes of enemies. Kratos' main weapon is the Blades of Exile, which is a pair of blades that are attached to chains wrapped around his wrists and forearms, which can be swung in a number of attacks. The executions are the most entertaining part of combat, but unfortunately, there's only one execution per enemy, and that's the one area where the game shows its age. Many modern games have multiple animations for executions to keep the game dynamic. Regardless, the combat works well, and it has to. It's the primary focus of the game. And the puzzle sections, although occasionally annoying, add critical thinking, variety, and pacing to the story mode. If the game were an all-out brawler, it would get repetitive. There's also many chests which are sometimes out in the open, and other times are tough to locate. The best part are the boss battles, where Kratos takes on larger-than-life enemies. Quick-time events can be a nuisance. We've seen quick-time events improve over the last few years with games like Tomb Raider and Hitman Absolution, so this is another area where the game shows its age. But it doesn't ruin the experience. The scale of everything from the interiors to the exteriors, and especially the boss battles, is really what sets this game apart. It's a signature of the game, it's impressive, and it's cool. It's the one thing that even movies with today's amazing special effects struggle to mimic. And of course, Kratos is an excellent hero. He's an anti-hero, but not your stereotypical tough guy. He has a larger-than-life attitude to take on larger-than-life enemies. Yes, he shouts almost every single line, but how else would you expect a jacked-up tough guy to respond?
You must help me!
Help you!
The score is epic, and it matches everything about the action. Even during the quieter moments, the music matches the gameplay. Challenge of Exile mode is a set of specific challenges that test your skills developed during the story mode. It's for when you want to do more in the game beyond the story. It was originally released as DLC, but it's included with the remastered version. The game also includes all of the DLC costumes. Some have effects on gameplay, but overall, this is just a bonus. It's not necessarily a reason to buy the game. And finally, there's the photo mode, which isn't all that special, but can be cool to mess around with. The difference between the PS3 and PS4 versions is very slim. Sure, it looks more detailed, but that's mainly due to the resolution upgrade. We've seen bigger improvements in older remasters, but there's not much to change between the PS3 and PS4. 60 FPS is silky smooth, but we shouldn't expect anything less from an HD remaster. The graphics still hold up mainly due to the style and visualized scale of the game. Kratos moves between spacious interiors to very open exteriors that highlight the size of enemies. It never gets old to watch Kratos battle and climb these huge beasts.
A tsunami is coming, and this is the first of many catastrophes you're doing!
You would have done the same!
It's a little unnerving to spend time with the seasoned Lara in Shadow of the Tomb Raider because her experience has changed her into a hardened, obsessive, and selfish individual. She's reached true colonizer form, determined to get the game's MacGuffin blind to collateral damage, much to the concern of her lovable partner Jonah. Her demeanor is reflected in a renewed focus on stealth, where the new mechanics and the jungle setting give Lara the opportunity for Predator-style ambushes. She can cover herself in mud for additional camouflage, string enemies up from a tree, and craft fear arrows, which cause humans to freak out and attack each other.
You won't get me!
You're also now able to transition back into stealth after being discovered, provided you can get away and break line of sight. There's a big emphasis on these new abilities, as tooltips throughout the entire game will continually remind you that they exist. But while her expanded skill set gives you more options to confidently and quietly hunt everyone on the map, it also highlights the cracks and inconsistencies in Tomb Raider's enemy logic and the limitations of the game's relatively unsophisticated core stealth mechanics. Sound still doesn't seem to play a significant factor in Tomb Raider's stealth. While firing at someone and throwing objects will draw attention, moving through rustling vegetation and making loud footsteps doesn't seem to faze anyone, even though the game suggests that it will. Nor will taking out a soldier behind another with his back turned, but those rules also seem malleable. There were sections in the game where my attempted stealth approach went wrong, a gunfight broke out, and after the dust settled I was shocked to discover an additional patrol of guards in the same area, only a few seconds away from the action, carrying on with a conversation as if nothing had happened. Lara's survival instincts ability will once again give you information on which enemies are safe to quietly take down without alerting others, but it can also reveal some puzzling inconsistencies in enemy awareness logic. There were too many times where I was able to get away with taking out a guard with one of his co-workers staring right at us, only meters away. Other times, the game will tell you it's unsafe to take out an enemy because of someone with line of sight halfway across the arena. You can't always trust your own perception of the map, even if it seems obvious. And using survival instincts feels necessary to constantly verify that the game agrees with your idea of what is safe or unsafe. When Shadow does throw you into a few mid-range combat encounters though, the difference becomes really clear. Fighting suppressing fire, scampering from cover to cover, throwing improvised molotovs, and pinging out headshot after headshot after headshot feels empowering. The combat mechanics feel much more suited to these scenarios, as was the case in previous games. And it's only here where Lara can feel like the ice-cold killer queen she's become.
I'm gonna find you.
Shadow of the Tomb Raider is nothing if not a gorgeous game, and it features some stellar level design, both aesthetically and mechanically. The environments are beautiful, and exploring the impressively dense locations in Mexico and Peru is a joy. Jungles feel imposing and endless. Ruined tombs are intricately detailed. Hub cities are enormous and lively, and it's easy to be completely distracted by discovering new paths and areas. Hunting down the game's artifacts, treasure chests, and numerous other collectibles, however meaningless you think they are, is also still enjoyable, as they give you a reason to go sightseeing. There's a lot of emphasis on underwater exploration in Shadow too. And while underwater sections can be frustrating as part of story missions, because instant kill piranhas that require you to hide in seaweed gets pretty old pretty fast, it's hard to resist swan diving into a huge body of water when you get a chance to explore on your own. But it's Shadow of the Tomb Raider's numerous challenge tombs and crypts that are the undisputed stars of the show. The impressive design of ancient mechanisms and the obscure solutions to using them and unlocking the path forward feel amazing to decipher after minutes of head scratching. The Shadow of the Tomb Raider also rewards you for completing these activities with exclusive skills and gear, making them more than worth your time. Traversing the treacherous environments in these tombs, as well as during the game's story missions, is thrilling in its own right too. Despite there always being an expected sense of peril, the designs of Lara's foolhardy paths between locations never gets old. There's always some kind of dicey maneuver at a terrifying height that makes you hold your breath. Mortal Kombat 11 is a fighting video game developed by NetherRealm Studios and published by Warner Bros. Interactive Entertainment. It was released in 2019 as part of the Mortal Kombat series. Mortal Kombat 11 is considered one of the most famous and popular fighting games in the video game industry. The game features a wide range of distinctive and diverse characters that players can choose from and fight with. The characters are beautifully designed with high-quality details, providing an exciting and thrilling fighting experience. The game stands out with its stunning and realistic graphics as it utilizes photogrammetry technology to capture the faces of real-life actors and transfer them onto the in-game characters. It also features smooth and interactive combat moves, enhancing realism and excitement. Additionally, the game includes a single-player mode called Mortal Kombat Story. which allows players to embark on an engaging narrative journey with Mortal Kombat characters. Furthermore, the game offers an online multiplayer mode that enables players to challenge other players from around the world. Mortal Kombat 11 also features various additional features, such as a character customization system that allows players to modify the appearance, abilities, and equipment of their characters. The game continuously provides updates and additions to enhance gameplay enjoyment and diversity. Overall, Mortal Kombat 11 has received positive reception from both players and critics. It has been praised for its beautiful graphics, enjoyable gameplay, and focus on storytelling. If you are a fan of fighting games, you are likely to find Mortal Kombat 11 to be an enjoyable and thrilling experience.
Time is running out. The prophecies say Fimbulwinter leads to Ragnarok.
God of War
War is
Ragnarok
coming.
is a highly anticipated game that has been in development for years. The game is a sequel to the critically acclaimed God of War 2018 and is expected to continue the story of Kratos and his son, Atreus. The game is set to be released on the PlayStation 5 and promises to be one of the most visually stunning and immersive games of the year. The gameplay of God of War Ragnarok is expected to be similar to its predecessor, with a mix of action, adventure, and puzzle-solving elements. Players will control Kratos and Atreus as they journey through the Norse realms, battling gods and monsters along the way. The combat system is expected to be more fluid and dynamic than ever before, with new weapons and abilities for players to discover and master. One of the most exciting aspects of God of War Ragnarok is its story. The game is expected to delve deeper into the relationship between Kratos and Atreus, exploring the complexities of their bond as they face new challenges together. The game is also expected to introduce new characters and gods from Norse mythology, adding depth and intrigue to the game's world. In terms of graphics and sound, God of War Ragnarok is expected to be a true masterpiece. The game's developers, Santa Monica Studio, have a reputation for creating visually stunning games, and God of War Ragnarok is expected to be no exception. The game's soundtrack is also expected to be exceptional, with a mix of orchestral and Nordic-inspired music that will help to immerse players in the game's world. Overall, God of War Ragnarok is shaping up to be one of the most exciting games of the year. With its stunning graphics, immersive gameplay, and compelling story, the game is sure to be a hit with fans of the series and newcomers alike. Whether you're a fan of action games or Norse mythology, God of War Ragnarok is a game that should not be missed.
Here!
Are you coming with us?
You'll get your answers soon enough. Well, some of them.
Resident Evil 2 Inches is a survival horror game that was released for the PlayStation 4 in 2019. It is a remake of the original Resident Evil 2 Inches game, which was released in 1998. The remake of Resident Evil 2 Inches received critical acclaim from both players and critics alike. It successfully modernized the classic game while staying true to its roots. The game features a compelling storyline set in the zombie-infested Raccoon City. Players take on the roles of Leon S. Kennedy and Claire Redfield as they navigate through the city, solving puzzles, collecting resources, and battling hordes of terrifying creatures. One of the standout aspects of Resident Evil 2 Inches is its atmospheric and immersive gameplay. The game creates a tense and suspenseful atmosphere, enhanced by its excellent sound design, stunning graphics, and realistic character animations. The dark claustrophobic environments and limited resources add to the feeling of vulnerability and constant danger. The gameplay mechanics are well refined, offering a satisfying mix of exploration, combat, and puzzle solving. The controls are responsive, making the combat encounters intense and engaging. The game also introduces the Re-engine, which delivers impressive visual fidelity and realistic physics. The level of detail put into the remastered version of Resident Evil 2 Inches is commendable. The environments are beautifully recreated, and the character models are highly detailed. The game also introduces a new over-the-shoulder camera perspective, which adds to the overall immersion and enhances the gameplay experience. The remake also includes some new features and changes compared to the original game, which help freshen up the experience for both new players and fans of the original. However, it still captures the essence and spirit of the original game, making it a great homage to the series.